Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Over the years, our outdoor projects have been some of the most popular, and today we have another one for you. It can be a table or a chair, and it even has storage. Made out of reclaimed cypress, it can be used both outdoors and inside as well. The inspiration came from an antique we found on the island of Bermuda. That's next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop. It's not often that we have a high government official as a guest on the new Yankee Workshop. Meet E. Michael Jones, who is the mayor here in St. George's, Bermuda.
Norm?
So, Mr. Mayor, what can you tell me about this old structure?
Well, actually, this was built in 1731. We bought it for the Historical Society in 1922. It had fallen into disrepair, and we're very, very proud of it. It's our museum now.
That's great. Now, these roofs that we see in Bermuda, you use those to collect water, right?
Oh, very much so. You can see the very thick slate, and you can see the gutter system that runs very close to the edge of the roof.
Right.
And runs right down and goes into what we call a tank, you call a cistern.
Right, so you don't let any escape. You want to save all the water that you can.
Every single drop.
Yeah, it's
Don't fall in there, Norm.
Now, how do you get it out of here?
Well, actually, in the olden days, you know, this was right beside the kitchen, and you just dip it up with the bucket and take it inside for your once-a-week Saturday night bath. Well, of course, now we use a pumping system. Okay. Come on inside. I'll show you one of the tubs.
Ah, the old kitchen.
Oh yeah, this was a great old space. It had lots of fun times here. And here's the old tub.
Oh, look at that.
Yep, it's made out of Bermuda cedar. And I can personally attest to the fact that it still doesn't leak after all these years. Every night, every Saturday night, whether I need it or not, come down and try it out.
Is that right?
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
Great. Well, this room is filled with a lot of interesting pieces.
Oh, very much so. This is a really, really exciting piece. I rather like this.
Yeah, it's sort of like a settle, I guess. Plenty of room.
It's very comfortable. And of course, there's storage underneath.
Yeah, lots of
storage.
Yeah.
But also keeping in mind that this was taken from a captain's cabin on a ship, on a sailing vessel. And what happens is you'd fall on the floor if you weren't careful when the boat was sailing. So at night, the captain, he'd just bring this over, and this would keep him from rolling off of his caught onto the floor. Keep
you safe in those rough seas.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very clever piece.
It really is.
I don't know how many of our woodworkers would want to build something like this,
yeah,
but there is something I noticed coming in that they would be interested in, this bench table.
Yeah.
Gives you a place to sit down. Now, is this a Bermuda piece?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's a very old Bermuda piece, but it's certainly something that would have been very popular back then.
Yeah, and you got storage underneath it here?
And they always had multi uses back then. And of course, if you lay the top down, pull out your dowel there, you've got a wonderful place to set up for afternoon tea.
That's great. Well, would you mind if I took a few measurements and took some pictures, and I could build one of these in the new Yankee Workshop?
Well, as long as you let us borrow one for a while and folks can come down and see it, I think we can work out a deal.
I think we can make a deal for that.
There you go.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right.
Well, hats off to E. Michael Jones, the mayor of St. George's, Bermuda, and his Historical Society. And here's our version of that Bermuda bench table. Now, it's not a great table and it's not a great bench, but boy, the flexibility. It's like those tools that people carry on their belt. They have a screwdriver, they have a saw, they have a file, they have a corkscrew. Not a great corkscrew, not a great file, not a great saw, but they have a lot of flexibility and they get the job done. Now, let me show you what I mean about this piece. As a table, it's difficult to square up and sit at. You can't get close enough. You have to sit sideways. That's not too bad. As a serving table, it's great. It's got a lot of surface on it. It would be great out in the yard during a barbecue. Now, as a bench, it has some storage underneath it. I don't know exactly what I'm going to put in there, but for now, let's put the pegs in there. The height of the bench, it's a little bit low, but it's a place to sit down and put on your boots and maybe just relax after the family barbecue. Now, the one in Bermuda was made out of cedar, and they had it indoors. We decided to build ours out of cypress because we see this as an addition to our outdoor projects. The cypress will hold up very well outdoors. Now, I made a couple changes. I made a cutout in the sides. They were straight up on the antique, and that made the back vertical when it was open, very uncomfortable. By putting a little cutout in there, it tips back a couple more degrees, and that makes it a lot better. I also widened these little feet extensions, and that makes the piece more stable. It won't feel like it's going to tip over. So if you'd like to build your own version of the Bermuda bench table, a measured drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we built our project out of cypress, and we buy ours from a supplier that gets the timbers from salvage. They're actually found on the bottom of riverbeds. They sunk on the way to the sawmill. He brings them up, saws them into planks, dries them, and I buy them like this, in the rough stage. This is 4/4, which means it's an inch thick in the rough. And after joining one face and then running it through my surface planer, I end up with material that looks like this. These boards are going to be for the top. The first thing that I do is look them over and pick the best face so it'll have a nice, clean top surface. And at the same time, I'm trying to alternate the growth rings. This one curves this way, the next one's down, and up. Now that will give me more stability in the top. It'll stop it from cupping. The next step is to clean up the edges. I'm going to glue all these boards together, and I need a nice, clean edge. And for that, the best tool is the joiner. Now, before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now, when I use the joiner, what I want to do is keep the board tight against the fence, which is perpendicular to the table. And when I push it through, I don't put pressure down. I simply slide it through the machine and let the knives do the work to clean up that rough edge and straighten it out. The next step is to place that jointed edge against the fence and adjust it so I take off about 1/4 inch. That will give me a board that's straight, and even though the edge will be pretty smooth, I'm still going to run that edge through the joiner. Well, let's take another look at the top. On the antique, the top was made with 2 wide boards. Now, wide boards are difficult to find, and they tend to cup a lot more than narrow ones. That's why I like to use a series of narrow boards. It makes the top more stable. On the antique, the top was secured to the cleats underneath with a series of nails. And in time, they loosen up, and the whole top gets loose. So what I did was drill counterbores and install some long screws into the top, so that will hold it securely in place. The glue that I like to use for these outdoor projects is a water-resistant glue. It's not a waterproof glue. You can't put it underwater, but we've made several projects with that glue, and we have yet to have one fail. I also like to use some biscuits, and the main reason for using these is that it makes it very easy to align the surfaces of the boards, because I have to glue this thing up quickly, and I don't want to have to fuss around with it. So let's cut the slots for those. Now here I'm putting some glue in those slots, and I have this little gluing device which meters just the right amount of glue into each slot. It makes it a lot easier to do. Then I use a roller to roll the edge, and I like to put glue on both mating surfaces. Okay, now I can just join the pieces together. You see how easily it adjoins those surfaces, which means there'll be much less sanding later. Now it's time to start working on the end panels of the bench, these curved pieces. Here are some blanks which I glued up just like the top we made with biscuits and glue. I've sanded it down. And here's a template that I made from the layout that will be in the plan. It's an actual size of the end. What I'm going to do first is take the template, line it up with one of the edges, and trace the outline. Okay, now we're going to take this to the bandsaw and make a rough cut, staying about 1/8 of an inch from the line. Now with the template repositioned on the blank, I'm going to secure it with a couple screws that are actually located where the holes are going to be for the pegs later. With the piece secured to the bench, I'm going to trim off the excess using this pattern bit. It has a ball bearing at the top. That's going to ride against the template, and that bit is going to make a nice clean cut around the edge. Let's look at the prototype again, and the next thing that I want to do is make a stop dado to receive this fixed part of the seat in each side panel, and I also want to make a dado that goes all the way across to receive the boards from the bottom. Here's one of the side panels clamped to the workbench, and the layout is done for the dado for the fixed portion of the seat. Now it's 1 inch wide, so it's going to take 2 passes. I've set up for the first pass with this straight edge clamp. I have a 1/2 inch bit in the router, and I can see through the router so I'll know where to stop. All right, that's the first pass. Now I'm going to move my fence and make the second pass. Okay, now I'll square it up with the chisel. Okay, now I'll do the other side. I'll take a sponge and moisten this joint, and come on in and take a close look at this joint. It's like a dovetail joint. It's not only decorative, but it functions to hold the sides together. They can't spread apart with this type of joint. So what I've done is laid out the joint on the side piece, clamped it here at the bench, and I made a jig to cut out the material to tie that crossboard in. There's a hole which has the same angles as the dovetail. On the underside there's a stop, and when I put the stop on originally I ran it long, so the first time I run the router through it actually makes a cut, a very accurate cut, which I can use to locate the jig on the piece. Here's my layout line. I slide that little cut over till it's on the line, and then I clamp it in place. My router is still set up with the 1/2 inch bit that I used to make the dados, except now I have a collar installed that's 5/8 of an inch in diameter, and I'm going to use that to guide around particularly the ends of the jig to cut the angle. Now I'm not going to try to remove all the material at once. It'll take 3 or 4 passes. The advantage of this jig is that I have a nice wide base to move the router. It isn't going to tip and move out of the way. Okay, that's 1, 3 more to go. With all the sockets cut in the side panels, I can now take the cross piece, locate where it should be, and mark the actual dovetail. And I number each one to make sure they stay perfectly matched. To make this short cut here, I'm going to use a stop block and the table saw. I make the angled cuts with the bandsaw freehand, and I want to leave the line. I'll use a sharp chisel to trim it up to get a nice snug fit. Well, now's the time to drill the holes in the sides that will receive those turned pegs. They're 3/4 of an inch in diameter. With a 1/8 inch radius bit, I can ease the edges of the holes. It'll make it easier to get the pins in. Now using a portion of a 1/2 inch radius bit, I'm able to round over any corners that I won't be able to get after the piece is assembled. I don't want to round over this straight section below the cross pieces because I'm going to add extensions. There's one more detail that I have to do before assembly, and that's to put a bead right along this edge of the fixed part of the seat. I copied that from the antique original. I'll do that at the router station. right, to start the assembly, I'm going to put in that fixed part of the seat, some glue in the dado, make sure it's flush with the back, square it up, and I'll secure it with a couple brads toenailed through. Now the bottom of the storage compartment is made up of 3 boards. It's not a panel. I'm actually going to leave a 1/4-inch space where it's going to hit that cross piece. So this is a little gauge. I want to let any water that might get in there drain out, and I want some air to circulate through the box. Now another one along the front edge. Again, face it back. All right, I have about 1 3/4 between these 2 pieces. I want a 1/4-inch gap on each side, so I need a piece a little over 1 1/4 inches. I'll just center this up by eye. All right, with glue in the other side. See if I can flip everything over, drop it into place, and secure it with a few more brads. Now one of the dovetailed cross pieces, some glue, tap it in. Now I'm going to pre-drill for some screws. For those little outriggers you saw me point out earlier, I have a little pattern. I'll just trace it and cut it on the bandsaw. Well, there's one more thing I want to do tonight before we wrap it up, and that's install these outriggers. A little bit of glue, and I'll clamp it up. Tomorrow, we'll make the top, finish the lid, turn some pins, and this project will be ready for some finish. Well, good morning. I'm getting started today by rounding over the bottom of the legs. I find that if I don't do that and I slide the piece over the floor, it can tear away. All I need is about 1/8 of an inch radius. The next thing to install are some cleats. One runs right under this fixed piece of the seat. It sticks out about 1/2 inch, and then I put a little cleat on each side, and that will add some support for the seat and take some pressure off of these hinges. I'm going to put the back piece on first, a little bead of glue, and since I won't be able to get a brad nailer into this storage compartment to nail it, I'm just going to put some spring clamps to hold it until the glue sets. Now for these side cleats, a little bit of glue in the middle, and I can get a brad nailer in here. You'll notice I've left a gap at the front and at the back, and that's to allow for some expansion or contraction of the side so that it won't push the front panel out. Wherever I assembled the piece with screws, I deliberately drilled a counterbore. I want to fill that counterbore with a bung made out of the same species as the piece. That way I won't see the screw head. All right, a little bit of glue, and I like to align the grain so it's parallel. Tap it in, wipe it off, and after it sets for a few minutes, I can take a flush cutting saw and remove the excess. Now I've switched to a 1/2 inch radius round over bit so that I can ease the edge along the front of that lid. Now's the time to mortise in for the little butt hinges for our lid, and you'll note that I'm using a zinc plated hinge. That way it won't rust when it's outdoors. All right, that takes care of the lid. Now I can turn my attention to the top. I've sanded the blank for the top, taken a jigsaw to knock off the corners, and now I'm just sanding them smooth. To treat the edges on our top, I'm going to use a bit like this. It's a bullnose bit. Now you'll note that there's no guide bearing on this bit, so I have to use my router table fence. The thing that's nice about this bit is that it does both edges at the same time. Of course, it won't do the corners. I'll do those by hand. Now I'm getting ready to drill holes in the cleats that will be secured to the top. Along this edge there are 3 half-inch diameter, 1 3/8 deep holes for the head of the screws. They're counterbores that will get plugged later. Where it meets the top, there's a counterbore on each end, again half-inch in diameter, 1 inch deep to allow for expansion and contraction of the top. And in the center there'll just be a through hole because I'm going to glue that center section. This is a 7/8 inch diameter hole to receive the pegs to secure the top. Now it's time to attach those cleats, and I will glue about 1 foot right in the center. And that's okay, even though we have a cross-grain situation. The expansion will take place on the ends. Well, here I'm turning a couple of those pegs, and to get the diameter of the dowel perfect, I'm using a little trick I learned from chairmaker Bill Wallach. Instead of calipers, I'm just using a 3/4 inch open-end wrench. All right, with all the pegs made, I've installed the ones that pivot the top. These will lock it in place. And I would say all we need to do is a little more sanding, and this piece will be ready for the finishing room. There are 2 schools of thought when it comes to finishing cypress. One is to put nothing on it, and the other is to put some kind of oil on it. Now we found up here that maybe because of the air pollution, it tends to darken, so we like to put some oil on it. This oil happens to be a combination of a high-grade linseed oil, some long oil alkyds, and tung oil. So that'll make it waterproof, and it will also protect it from the environment. Well, here it is with a nice coat of oil on all the surfaces, ready for many years of hard use, either indoors or out. And I can tell you this, it's a lot more comfortable than the antique. I think the mayor of St. George's would agree.
If you've enjoyed this new Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of shaker style, or colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.